9 and 10, we summarized the Western alphabets and tried to show some of the ways in which it was organized. You could create columns, you could link the letters 1 and 2, or 1 and 12, or the larger alphabets 1 and 18, and then create sequences. Now, another way of organizing the letters will be the topic of this 11th talk, and that is to use the geometrical shapes of nature as a way of organizing both letters and the world. In the, especially in the tantric tradition of the Hindus, we have a cube and an octagon, and they are called the Ghana Mandala and the Vajra Mandala, and they link to the womb world and the diamond world, which you find throughout Middle Asia and Far East Asia. And if you look closely at these two mandalas, you'll see a number of letters there. And so what looks like a physical object is a way of arranging metaphysical sounds. Now, there's a whole philosophy behind this, because the bell or the scepter, also called the Vajra, or the Ghana and the Vajra, link with Garbha Dhatu and Vajra Dhatu, the womb world mandala, the diamond world mandala, the dynamic and the static, form and emptiness, manifest and not manifest, mortal and immortal, the five elements in the inanimate form, and then the sixth element, the animate form, that is consciousness. So whereas the West has 4 plus the fifth element where everything happens, in the East it's 5 elements plus a sixth element. And then this is physical manifestation, whereas the scepter or the Vajra represents the cosmic principle. Well, in the West, there are less subtle systems. One of the obvious ones is to use a cube, and then to link the sides of the cube with the directions and with the Hebrew letters, for example. And here you see another version. And then, because the Hebrew letters are also linked with the tarot cards, there are also versions where the tarot cards are put into a cube. In the north, so now we're talking about Scandinavia, you take an octagon and then align the sides of the octagon with the 24 runes. And of course, you can abstract that until you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points, which then become the 9 worlds. And that gets you then, on the one hand, to the 9 worlds, but also to the world tree, which can sometimes be represented like this, and sometimes become a physical tree, and sometimes, as we noted, bits of this then become individual runes. Here is an octagon now to deal with BGD KPRT. So the 7 double letters of Hebrew, and here you see another version of the cube related to the alphabet. Well, there are also 3-dimensional spherical versions of these concepts. So we've mentioned the tarot. In the case of the tarot of the Bohemians, we take a sphere, and then that sphere can be represented simply as a plane, but it can also be represented like this, and you can arrange all the tarot cards that way. And similarly with the letters or the numbers or the signs of the I Ching, of which there were 64, as I pointed out. And in the lecture where we talked about the earthly connections, I pointed out that there was a way of doing the I Ching as two interlinked spheres or spirals. But here is another version. This is a well, it was probably there from the beginning, but it has become an object of study in the last generation, when a gentleman realized that you could take the 64 hexagrams of the thing and arrange it along the lines of a Yi globe, as he calls it. And this then produces, it produces a series of spirals and a whole series of different geometrical representations. Now, in the Christian tradition, I noted that there were letters, and the letters make words, and those words have the letters have a gematria, and then the words have a gematria. So a numerical value. And then some of those numbers, this starts really with the Greek tradition, where people realize that some numbers it's called figurative geometry. So if I have 3, then that can make a triangle. If I have 4, that can make a square. 5 can make a pentagram. Well, that's the easy bit. But then you start to see very curious combinations. That is to say, I can take a hexagon of 7, so 1 plus 6 hexagons together, or circles together, and then I can add another 6, and 7 and 6 gives me 13. Or I can take 19 of these circles and then add some, and then I get 30. So here I get a star of 13 with a hexagon of 7. Here I get a star of 19 and a star of 37 with a hexagon of 19. Now this becomes, of course, interesting when we start to do polyvalent thinking, because 19, you will recall, is the number for 100 as in terms of gematria, whereas 37 is the gematria for 10,000. And 10,000, 37, there are 37 kinds of strokes in Chinese. There are 37 letters in the simplest alphabet of the Chinese, and 37 is one of the key numbers of creation in the West. And so this curious little star becomes the starting point for what's called the creation hologram in interpreting the written text of the Bible both as numbers and as figures. And then if you take 37 as a hexagon, then you get 73 as a star. And in my Tokyo lectures, I will show you that the Hebrews created from these curious combinations, not just the Star of David, which of course they borrowed from, or the Star of Solomon, which they borrowed from the Star of Vishnu, but in fact a whole numerical cosmology. I'll give you one example later on in this talk, where I look at the associations with 19 and its multiples. But now the story gets more interesting, because here is a circle, I have a square, and I can make that into this kind of hexagon. So I can make it into this kind of hexagram, but really it assumes a cube, which I then project downwards and I get this, or I project from the side and I get this. And so a single cube is fine. But if I have 4 cubes, then I get 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. And now life gets interesting. 64 is the gematria for the word aletheia, which is the word for truth. And now if I look at it from the side, then I can only see a certain number of those. Well, even from here, I can not see all 64 cubes. I can only see a certain number. Which number? 37. And so there is an extraordinary way in which I look at an object and it gives me one number, or sorry, I see one number, but it implies another number. And so you can create a whole cosmology on the basis of how these relate. And so if I have 4 times 4 cubes, I have a certain number. If I have 5 times 5 cubes, I have another number. Now if I take 5 times 5 cubes and subtract 4 times 4 cubes, then I get the number that's visible in the 5 times 5 cubes. So I will not go into all of this in detail, but you can see that if I am trying to understand letters and numbers and so on, so I have this as a 4 by 4 square, of which I can see 37. I can make of that 37 dots. But then I can have, yes, so 4 times 4 times 4 gives me the actual cube. 4 times 4 times 4 minus 3 times 3 times 3 gives me 37. To give you a bigger example, 7 times 7 times 7 gives me a cube. 7 times 7 times 7 minus 6 times 6 times 6 gives me 120 of the 326 that are visible. If I have a cube of 729, namely 9 times 9 times 9, then I subtract 8 times 8 times 8, and I have 217 that are visible. And each of those are important numbers again. And so I am reading a text which is numbers which I can translate into a visible form. And so this is one of the symbolic forms for St. Peter, who is the chief apostle of the Christian church, because he said, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. But the rock wasn't just a rock, it was a cube. And it wasn't just any cube, it was a cube that was 9 times 9 times 9. And if I unfold this, I get a church. And you saw in at the end of the 6th lecture that the church has in front of it a baptistry. So we have a cube and an octagon. So again, the cube and octagon of the bell and the vajra in the but now this is Peter or Christ, and the octagon is then John the Baptist. Coming back, remember we saw in the beginning of the lecture on the so-called breathing process, I told you that there were really 3 worlds implied. We saw how these letters made up, combined to make a human figure, and that you could reduce the human figure to this one and that one and that one. But here we see that if we take them as 3 lines, we have a book of God, which is this line, a book of man, which is this line, and a book of nature, which is this line. And then they can be reproduced on a cube like this in geometrical forms. And then in the Kabbalistic tradition, that cube then becomes the starting point for transformations of nature from a cube into another shape and into other elements. Well, I also showed you how the so-called 10 Zephirot, or these 10 points, could be made into 2 cubes, which we saw were also the the starting point for the matrix for making letters. I can reduce that to a dot, a line, a triangle, and a hexagram, or sorry, a quadrangle at an angle. I can reduce that to a so-called tetractys. So this is now a triangle of 1, 2, 3, 4 dots. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. I can reduce it to this version, and now it's 3 plus 7 plus 12 if I do the colors of the, and I get 22, which is the number of letters of the 3 AMS plus the BGKPRT plus the 12 for the zodiac. And then I can link this with actual letters. And then if I join all the connections, then I have 32 connections. And those are the 32 paths of the Hebrew. And then I can create yet other forms. And so it's again, the structure, the mathematical structure helps me to structure the letters, but it's also the very structure that helps me to create the letters, and then the paths between the letters that show me the laws of the universe. And so then I can create my upside down lambda with my 1, 2, 4, and 3, 6, 9. Or I can do it in terms of dots, or I can do it in terms of other things. And then I can look at this geometrically and say, right, I'm going to have 1 point, 2 points, then I have a line, 3 points, and I have a triangle, 4 points, and I have a pyramid. Now I can take those points, add the lines, add the triangles, add the tetrahedra, add them together, and I get 26. And 26 is one of the numbers for life. And here you see this figure geometry again. So 1, 3, 6, 10, 1, 4, 9, 16, 1, 5, 12, 22. And then I can put all of this together in one picture and then have a geometrical way of drawing the Hebrew letters. Or I can start to do more fascinating and complicated versions that we could easily spend an hour just on that page. But then we can create a single circle with 22, linking all these with lines, a drawing to which we'll return in a few minutes. I can do it this way as a triangle, or I can use the hexagram as a grid and use that to produce all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So the geometry is, again, the way of approaching it, but also the way of creating the letters. I told you about 19. 19 is the earth, behold, manifestation, and Eve. And its value, as we said, was 100. But it's also the hexagon. It is also yods, or Y's and spokes. Times 2 is 38, means his glory. Times 3 means and. Times 4 means fullness. Times 6 is gracious, or logos star. 19 times 19 means flesh, boy, child, or lamb. 19 times 37 means and the earth. 19 times 38 means the sufferings, sum his glory. 19 times 67 is again and. 19 times 71 is dwelt amongst us. 19 times 146 is again and. 19 times 242 is as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace. And 19 times 372 is glory and truth, or doxan kai aleithas. And so a single number in combinations starts to get me into a whole theology. Origins of the 22 letters is a mystery, but in the Far Eastern traditions, we find that this is linked with yin and yang, and we find cases where we organize the letters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which gives me then the trigrams 1, 3, 5, 7, and then going the other way, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and this gives me 2, 4, 6, 8 in terms of the trigram. And so that what looks like just a sample number or a number by it has very deep meanings in terms of mathematics, and this is discussed in the Russian texts of the Chinese, interestingly enough. You don't find it in the West. But this suggests that the discussions that have been made by some scholars that you take the 10 eternal signs and the 12 temporal signs of the 12 zodiac signs, so 10 plus 12 to get you 22, might be the real reason, or one of the real reasons, why people decided that 22 was such a good number for many of the Western alphabets, but which, as we saw, had already begun with Brahmanicum, so the Indians must have known about it as well. And what we find then is that all the basic shapes, so the triangle, which of course in the Sri Yantra is particularly favored, but then you can take Hamza and then you can make a triangle of sounds of Kama, Kala, and Kappa. You can take the three and create a triskel or create three circles, which then produces a kind of threefold shape as well, which we see here again. I can then link that with three different combinations of the sound IE, EU, or UE, and then I can add that together to get IE, UE, which is a variant on the Yahweh. This basic frame creates a basic framework for saying that the Father is not the Son, is not the Holy Spirit, whereas the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. And so, or here a more dramatic version, or here I take 7 points, and so I have a triangle of sun, moon, and body. And if we remember Kaya Vakchita and things like that, and then we get 7, and that becomes a way of dealing with the 7 stages of alchemical process to get to perfection. And now we see how we can take the 4 and link them to the 4 elements, and then the triangle, the quadrangle at 45 degrees. That gives me then the qualities of hot, cold, dry, and wet. Or I can alternatively do it this way, inscribe the square within such a thing, or I can make a circle and do world, year, and human, which can be represented in another way by that key, remember, which was one part of the swastika. Or I can do it this way, or I can start to add letters to this, or I can make letters at each of the points, or I can make a whole rectangle of letters and then start to make geometrical figures with individual letters. So the geometry helps to create a structure which at the same time functions to organize ideas and letters. And here, the same principle, but now a little more advanced. So the 5-sided pentagram becomes a way of organizing 5 basic symbols, or it allows me to make a gentleman within a circle. I can then link those bits of the pentagram with air, earth, fire, water, and spirit. So instead of 6 to get consciousness in the East, we have only 4, and then the 5th is spirit. Then I can use that to create a tetragrammaton, and then you'll see that here again there are different letters. So this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, and this is 5 and 6, and therefore we have a hexagram there. I can make a man like this one, and that becomes Adam, or this one and it becomes Samael. Or here I can take I can take a pentagram, connect the points, and I have a pentagon. I link these to 5 vowels, or I take that concept and make it a ring, and then the 5 points become either the 5 vowels or the words S-A-L-U-S, which is salus, from which we get salutations, and the Greek is hugeia, or U-G-E-I-A, from which we get hygiene. And so the pentagram becomes not only a nice symbol that we can link with a ring, but it becomes a symbol for magic. And of course, a pentagram going up is good, and a pentagram going down is normally the devil. And it becomes then a symbol of health. And in the tradition of the Celts, then I simply make a 4-sided, and then the 4 sides become that stick with 1 twig, 2 twigs, 3 twigs, or 4 twigs, and I get across that way. The Chinese then take 2 of these pentagons and put them together, and to create a decagon. And here you see an alchemical version of that. And then here is a variant that creates a dodecahedron, and that then gets made physically as a symbol of the universe. The 6 is extremely interesting because I can take the 6 like this. We saw how if we join the sides to that, that we create a cube, an isometric cube. But now if I take a single point and go 7 steps here, 7 steps there, and so on, yes, I get that. And these are now the 7 steps of the Buddha in the 4 directions. And if I put those together, 7 plus 7 plus 7 plus 7, I have a month. And then I can create a regular shape like this one and start to get number symbolism going this way. Or I can put this hexagram into a circle and use it to identify specific letters. Or it can become a letter itself, in the case of Ea, in the runes. Or here in one of the early Slavic things. Or I can take this and put a P there, but which is actually an R. And so this is now Chi Rho, and this is the first 2 letters of the letter of the name of Christ. Or I can put that hexagram that's implied in a circle and then link the 4 royal stars or the 4 royal animals or the 4 evangelists to the 4 corners, and I have further mysticism. Or I can apply this now to, I can take that same 6-fold and create the 6 worlds of Buddhism. I can create this kind of thing linked with the flower of life. Or I can now make a hexagram where the upward one is the tree of life and the sideward one is the tree of knowledge. And so I go down from Adam and then back up to Eve. So from the king to Adam, down to Eve and Regina. And then I can make Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And it now becomes a descent into heaven and hell. And then I can link the 6 points with 6 letters and have it as 6 vowels. And then I can put that into a number symbolism and get... And so anything that you can do as a letter can be linked to a number, can be linked to a geometrical figure. And so in creating your world order, you can, it's as if we needed special glasses. That I look and I read the text, and first of all I have to be able to read the letters, but then I have the text and I say, now I want the numerical text. Now I want the geometrical text. Now I want the physical version of the geometrical text. And it's as if we have different layers of reality all there, and most of us look at it and just say, oh, well, that's just a book with a few letters. And very few of us have learned to see that that same text can, on the one hand, have multiple meanings, and at the same time have these multiple layers of symbolism. And this is a lovely example. So this is those 6 lines again. If I just join those lines, I get this isometric cube. There it is again. Here it is like this. Now it becomes a flower of life. Here you see it developing. And then that becomes the basis of creating all the regular solids. And these regular solids then become, this one gets called the Philosopher's Stone. But that's a big story, and we're not going to go into all of that. What's of interest to us is that you can start again with your with these circles, and you create a so-called star of Metatron, and then each of the sides is used to create one of the regular solids. And you can imagine a tetrahedron, a pyramid, one that encloses my body, or in this case a woman, another one that encloses the place that they're sitting, and notice again, well, we call it ha-tha in those, but the Russians call it ha-tha, but it's again the sun and the moon, yes? And it's again those 2 versions of the swastika. Now I can take that same shape, I can project it, and it becomes a hexagram. So what looks like just a star, of which we've seen the numerical calculations a few minutes ago, is also a 3D exploitation of space. So it's as if I had my glasses and I now say, now show it to me in 3D, or you know, when you go to the movies and you see it in 3D. And then you get more complex versions of that, so this becomes, well, Technicolor, and you see it that way, and then it becomes linked with enlightenment, and you get it linked with the angels and so on. Now here is a hieroglyphical representation of Jupiter, or Pan. So on the surface it's just a creature with horns. But if you look more closely, each part of the body is now a letter of the alphabet. So A is a ruddy face, the power of heat of the world. B, the power of the heavenly rays upon the sublunary nature. And C, the mundane elements. And so what looks like just a picture is actually a series of letters each of which has a meaning, and K is the harmonies of the 7 planets. So whereas in some of the alphabets, the 7 double letters become the 7 planets, here the letter K, not K, KPRT, BGD, KPRT, now just the letter K becomes all the 7 letters on the whole planets. Now, there are much more complicated versions of doing this, and now we link the first letters A, B, C, D, E, F with musical scales. Well, this looks quite complicated, is quite complicated, but remember what I showed you with the Melakarna version of southern India, where there were 72 different kinds of musical notes linked with the cosmos. These are just glimpses of the different ways in which letters and cosmology get linked. One of my first pictures was of the Mara rune, also called Tengri. Well, here you see the Tengri rune again, and now you see that each of the points has letters. So this becomes a way of generating, not only symbolizing a letter, or taking a quarter and making it the Algiz rune or a Y, but actually generating the whole of the alphabet. And here you see a combination of these things to create another rune. Here you see 8 basic runes for the 8 different times of the year, and you can then link that with symbolic images like this and do a Christian version of Aum. When we look more closely at the numbers, we have the regular figurate numbers, but we also have certain numbers that are particularly important. One are primes. Primes are numbers that you cannot divide. And so here are the primes under the age under the age of 100. What is fascinating to me is that when we're talking about when we were talking about the figurate geometry, we said that certain numbers like 19, 37, 73 were extremely important. And here, 19, 37, 73 are all primes. And then there are harmonic numbers under 1,000. And then there is something called the Fibonacci spiral, which goes 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 7, and then 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, and so on. And if we go to nature, well, to this part of the world, you have something called the Shalagram, which is connected with your gods and with many things of creation. It is linked with Ammonite. There is an Ammonite one, and it's linked to the shape of a nautilus. And it's linked to the koru, which is a kind of stone, and it's linked with a fern called the fern frond. And these all have the Fibonacci numbers connected. And so these again play a role in all of these complex things linking the cosmology of the earth and the heavens. This could again, of course, be a whole lecture series just on the way in which these basic forms have created the basics for science. There's a wonderful book by Darcy Wentworth Thompson called Growth and Form, which explores many of these themes. But that's not our topic today. For the moment, I'm going to spend a few minutes showing how these combination of numbers and geometries link up in making cosmologies with respect to the alphabet. So I can take my basic magic squares of 1 times 1 times 1, or 2 going up to 22. I can do metacubes and arrive at a different set of numbers. And then the 3 times 3 equals 9 cube. That gives me, in terms of lines, gives me the number 15 and the sum 45. I can align the planets from the furthest to the nearest this way, and that gives me then the Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. Or I can do it the other way and then do it backwards. And remember, that was the inhale and the exhale. And so the BGD series of letters can either go from the bottom up or the top down. Or I can take those same letters and link them to organize the whole of the cosmos, from the outer Empyrean, as it's called, to the level of the stars, then the level of the 9 kinds of angels, and then the 7 planets and the 4 elements. Or I can start to create worlds. So here in the Hindu system, we have 7 higher worlds, starting at the top: Satyaloka, Tapaloka, Janaloka, Maharloka, Svargaloka, Bhuvaloka, and Bhuloka. And then the 7 lower worlds, or hells: Patala, Atala, Rasatala, Mahatala, Talatala, Vitala, and Sutala. These link with descriptions, so Anam, Agam, Akasha, Aum, Kal, Desh, and atomic form. In the Bon, this becomes primordial unity. This becomes the world of the gods, the demigods, the angels, man, and darkness. In the Hebrew world, this is world 0. This is world 1 of the gods, of the devas, of the angels, of man, and of the demons. And often we just get these 4 mentioned, so it becomes Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asaya, or Asya, from which we get force, pattern, activity, and form. In the Christian, we have 6 worlds again: the original, the intellectual, the celestial, the elemental, the lesser world of the microcosm, and then the infernal world of hell. And so we see that although the systems are different, in the sense this is 14, this is 6, this is 4 or 5, this is 6 again, the fundamental ideas are the same. And that at a certain point it's above sound, and roughly the sound begins here, and in the or it's intellectual sound in the Hebrew one here, and it's not until you get down here or here that we get the physical sound. Amongst the Nazarene Essenes, here are the 5 worlds, so the living ones, the gods, creation, angels, human world, or demons. Halut, Lalut, Yaburut, Malakut, Nasut. Here are the equivalents in Hebrew. Here are the equivalents in the Christian. And here we see that this is Shin, this is the 12 simple letters, this is Aleph, and the 7 double, and this is Mem. And here in Arabic, the first 8 letters are the universal. The letters 9 to 17 are the ultimate sphere, and from the 7th level, heaven, down to through the 7 planets. 18 to 21 are the elements, and 22 to 28 is the minerals. So the letters of the alphabet, on the one hand, are the sounds, but on the other hand, they're also the structure of the whole universe. And even though they vary in the various cultures, we can see that there are clear connections. Well, in the simple version of the Hebrew tradition, we have these 10 points to get to creation. However, in the more complicated versions, you don't have 10, you have a whole series of these little masks, and these are 2 complicated pictures that show you that you have hundreds of these stages going down through the Sephiroth and the Sephiroth trees. Here are some other ones. So the 4 worlds each has its own Sephiroth tree, and those 4 worlds can then be summarized in a letter. So Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya is Yot Ha Vav Ha, which is again the word for Yahweh. So you have 4 letters, are 4 worlds, are 4 trees of life, which in itself connect all the 22 letters, and the connections between them are the 32 paths connecting the letters. So the letter is the world and is at the same time the starting point for the tree, which is belonging to one world and then going on to the next. Well, then you can take those 4 letters I, H, V, H, and you can start to create, link them with different angels, and then you can use these as a grid system for creating variants. So IHVH, IHHV, IVHH, IHVH, I have to be really awake for this one, and then do all of those. And so the 4 letters become not only the 4 letters representing the unspeakable name of God or of the Almighty, but also become a way to create a grid of sounds to create the world. And then you get simplified versions that here you have the world above creation. The star of Vishnu becomes now a framework for linking the spirit for the male, matter, earth, water, spirit, earth, matter, and spirit, water, to create Adam Kadmon, which is primeval man. And then below you have hell. And then this gets linked with the tarot cards. So I can create all these cards. These I can put into the zodiac. I can put them into number symbolism so that I have 4 sets of cards: swords, wands, cups, and coins. I can link that with number symbolism so that I get to 78 again. I can link it to keyboards and to music and get a whole symbolism that way. And then I can link a square to those 4 sounds and make hexagrams. And then, and then I have sets of hexagrams. So now I have a hexagram for God the Father, God the man, and God the universe. The man God, the man man, the man universe, and the universe God, and the universe man, and the universe universe. Well, for the next 4 minutes or so, I'm going to show you something that officially is not connected, but in fact is connected. Namely that the making of these magical squares goes into the game world. Now, we would say that's obvious because everything today is a game. But in the old days, well, in the 1300s, there was a girl in northern Italy and in the town of Marostica, and she wanted to marry a boy from the next door. Or sorry, the other way around, of course. It was the boy that wanted to marry a girl from the next town, except it was an enemy town. And the normal thing would be for the father to say, no, 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 you're not going to be, you're not going to marry this woman and out with you, or just dump her, or something not very kind. However, the father was wise, and I think he was also the mayor of the town. And so he said, right, I'll tell you what. We're going to have a chess game. And if you win the chess game, you win my daughter. Except rather than just playing a normal chess game with little pieces on a board, you're going to get all the members of the family to be chess players, and so they all stood there, and they all became parts of the game, and the game took 3 days. He won the game, he won his wife, and they lived happily ever after. And the story was so great as a publicity stunt that every year now in September, you can go to Marostica and you can see a live chess game. Now, that's terribly original, we would be told, but there's a man called Henri Pictou who went to India, and he discovered that there were live chess games in India as well. So where it really started, only the chess king knows, or the chief. But this is of interest to us for a very simple reason, because in terms of magic squares, this is 8 times 8 is 64. And that is one of the basic numbers for Vastu, but it represents the invisible world. And 9 times 9 is 81, represents when the invisible becomes visible. And we'll come back to that in Appendix 12. At this point, I'm just showing you that what starts as an attempt to understand and organize the world geometrically and numerically leads on the one hand to frameworks for letters and leads on the other hand to games. But the chess game is by no means the only one. There is a royal game played in the north of Europe called Hnefatafel, or sorry, first we have Wei Qi. Wei Qi in its simple form is 8 by 8. Then there is a more complicated version, 13 by 13, and a more complicated version, 19 by 19. And an even more complicated 19 times 19 by 19. So this is a Chinese game. It's also called Go. And it is, well, the simple thing is that this is Chinese. This is the Chinese version of chess, but it's much more complicated than chess because it links with a play of the cosmos. And my computer programmer, when I was for a year at the Getty, was Dr. Richard Dolan, and he was a student of Feynman, the Nobel Prize winner in physics. He was the American champion of Go, and he flew to China, used Tibetan rules of the 14th century to beat the Chinese at their own game. So another way of playing democracy rather than throwing bombs at each other. In the north of in Scandinavia and so on, there's a game called Hnefatafel. And it again has, or the Wings of the Evangelists. And it again has 19 by 19. And here is an extraordinary thing called the square grid of Xian, or from the Zhou dynasty, or the Zhou dynasty. If you look closely, 492, 357, 819. This is your magic square, yes? But then this is a magic square that expands incredibly. And so this was a game played by the kings. This was a game played by the ruler, and was also used as a framework for creating not the Vastu of a single building, but of a whole city. And there's a fantastic book on the magic grid for city building in China by a German scholar. And here is a game that's called Dogs and Jackals board game, and you have a palm tree in the middle, and again, it's a question of going through the cosmos that way. Well, why is all of this vaguely interesting for our game? Well, because here is one of the ways of doing the Sanskrit alphabet. Again, now in a circle, and here is a circular version of the Hebrew alphabet. Here is a circular version of the Christian alphabet. And in fact, you get then mystical versions. So I take the 22 letters, I link every point with every point, and I then not only have I have so-called 231 gates. And, well, it's actually 462, but then you subtract and you get 231. Now this 231 gets interesting because we haven't got time to go into it now, but you can do a cycle. You can do a cycle of 7 days for a week, and then you can do 21 of those cycles, and then you get a 19-year period, and then you can do 21 of those cycles, and then you get a 149-year period, and finally you get a 231-year period. So this becomes a way of doing the lunar cycles for nature. So the 22 letters give you a circle, but that circle is then a starting point for a whole cosmology again. And you can arrange them in terms of the buds of a rose in the Rosicrucian circle, or you can arrange them in terms of a hexagram, and then this line defines. Or you can do a triangle here, a heptagon, and then a larger one here. So the point is not to say that this is the right one or that is the wrong one, that there are many ways of connecting the letters that form numbers, that link with geometry, that also then in terms of organization becomes a way of presenting the letters. So here we see how the letters are organized for the Kabbalah and for the mystical side of the Hebrew tradition. But that basic principle then gets applied to different languages. So here in a diagram from the 17th century, we see the Kabbalah and we see letters around here. Here we see the letters of Slavic and Phoenician being compared by a scholar from Russia. And then in the 13th century, we have a remarkable man called Raymond Lull, or Lullius. And Raymond Lull was interested in not just having letters, but creating a machine that would generate letters and words. So he takes a sphere, he has the basic letters, B, C, D, and so on. He links this with different concepts like goodness and so on. And then he has various kinds of these squares. And it's a very complicated system. We could easily have 26 lectures just on this. The point is that instead of having a thing for mystical purposes to arrange letters, now I have a mechanical device. He's considered one of the first fathers of computing, because in a curious way, what he's doing is creating a way of linking words, concepts, letters in a system. And this becomes the fashion. So a man called Giordano Bruno, who was a Catholic but who had heretical ideas and was eventually burned, also created this kind of sphere with Hebrew and Latin letters. Then people started to create matrices. And there was a man called Leibniz. Leibniz believed that there should be such a thing as a universal alphabet of concepts, and also to understand the whole world. He was also one of the fathers of what we now call computing. And so he creates extraordinary diagrams like this. In the mystical tradition, there is an assistant to, or somebody working in the court of Queen Elizabeth I called John Dee, and he creates a sigillum, or the sigil of Ameth. And if you look closely here, you will see all kinds of letters and numbers connected there. Here is a gentleman called Harsdorfer, and again, you have all these letters around here. So these are ways of generating letters for mystical purposes, or for just, Harsturfer was mainly a playwright. And in the 19th century, there was this remarkable man called Saint-Yves d'Alvedre. We mentioned him before when I was talking about that early, remember in the 1890s, he was approached, or the 1880s, he was approached by a mystic from India who was a prince. And he created various magical alphabets. This is an archaeometer. So he links it with the 12 zodiac signs, also with the chief feasts of the year. So this is this Sunday, Easter, and then we have Corpus Christi, Assumption, All Saints, Christmas, and Ash Wednesday. So we're just at the end of the Lent cycle, and which, given today, is also the beginning of the new year in Nepal. But then we have various versions of this. He calls this a zodiac of speech, and now links these zodiac signs with letters and with musical notes, and gets this he calls arithmology. And then we get the letters linked with the zodiac signs and astronomical signs, and we get back to this Umbanda, the complicated alphabet of the Brazilians. Here is a full-blown version of his magical alphabets. Here another version, and here are the three first letters Aum, Ban, Da, of this Umbanda, which of course is a circle with a line. The same thing rotated 90 degrees, and then going out like that in the form of a Y. And here the 7 Orishas. And so we see now again how what starts as a mystical thing becomes a way of understanding the grammar and arranging the letters of everyday use. And then the mystical comes back, except the mystical then takes on really complicated forms. And we are told that this goes back to possibly 50,000 before Christ. According to his, and this is part of Lemuria. So this is, remember there was a subcontinent that linked India. Well, in the Mahabharata, there's just that little bridge that the monkey king built, built to go across to Sri Lanka or Ceylon. But in the old days, that was all Lemuria and linked directly to 30,000 years ago, we're told, linked to Australia. And then Australia, in turn, linked to another subcontinent for what is now just a little bit of New Zealand. And if we look closely here, this is that sign of the male that we saw before at the very first lecture, and the very first symbols. And here, and that's Ha and He, depending on whether it goes up or down. And that links to the 16 great signs of the geomantic system. And there we find it again. So there is an extraordinary way in which these signs that we think we know have a history, then a prehistory, and a pre-prehistory. And unfortunately, with the exception of probably a couple of dozen people in the world, nobody remembers this pre-prehistory. But that is a first glimpse of how all of this fits together. In a final lecture, I'll try to summarize some of the large comments that I've made, But I hope you will see by now that what seemed like a simple thing, oh yes, letters, I know my ABC, is not just about speaking the letters. These are the letters that were spoken to create the world. They are the letters that keep us alive through breathing, that we express through motion, and that in fact allow us to organize the whole of the world. Thank you very much.